All right, welcome to the SumerSports Show, Monday edition of the program. Thomas is not here. We have a few computer glitches a little bit there. Thomas is not here. Thomas is in Los Angeles. He just as a fan, went to watch the Rams play Sam Howell and the Washington Commanders yesterday. So he's gone. But I am joined with two great data scientists here, Ben Brown and Tej Seth. Tej, you were already, you've been a co-host of this program before. You also host Stats and Schemes with Sean Syed every Tuesday and possibly twice a week moving forward here. How are you guys doing?
We're doing. I'm not as good as Tej. Basically, Tej is on the verge of clinching the NFC North Championship in front of my very eyes here, coming up on Christmas Eve with the Detroit Lions facing off against the Minnesota Vikings. But I don't know. After my epic meltdown, Minnesota style against the Bengals, I'm just like kind of reeling in a lot of ways. So hopefully Tej and I can fill in for Thomas in some sort of applicable fashion. But I know it takes two of us to do the work of what Thomas Dimitrov can do for sure. So it is humbling, but I'm glad to be here and I appreciate you having me on.
We got some good comments here about Sam Howell and having to watch him live. Yeah, this has been fun for everybody who's not privy to the show. By the way, we have really good numbers going right now here, both on YouTube and Twitter. So we thank you all for coming. Ben, grew up in the same town basically as I did, is still a Vikings fan somehow out of the grace of God and maybe more loyalty than me. Tej is obviously from the Detroit area and is a Lions fan and is going to get to see, in all likelihood, the first division title in his lifetime. Tej, let's switch gear. Like, I know we were going to talk Bengals Vikings for a second, but let's talk briefly about Denver versus Detroit. Denver, you were at that game. Denver was on their third straight road game, sort of shorter rest, have lost now two of the last three. We're kind of sort of teetering there, but the Detroit Lions, were struggling a little bit, right? They were kind of, up front. Jared Goff had faced a lot of pressure in the defense, which I think was the most impressive part of what they did Saturday. They had given up 25 points in 5 consecutive games. I'm sorry. When you watched that game on Saturday, did you think it was a harbinger of things to come? Kind of like the offense hitting on all cylinders, things working, sort of as they should, or did you think it was just a good spot for the Detroit Lions against kind of a Denver team dealing with a lot of headwinds, coming into Week 15?
Like I texted you guys, the three people I'm most thankful for in my life are you two and Sam Laporta. And it really was a Sam Laporta game on Saturday, which I think was huge. And like, you look at the Lions from a team building aspect and like the trade to move on from TJ Hawkinson ended up being a win-win. I think when you look back at it, Vikings get exactly what they needed from Hawkinson's play. And then the Lions are able to hit on the right tight end here. And Sam Laporta gets someone who leads the league in receiving touchdowns among tight ends, top 5 in yards per route run, top 5 in receiving yards among tight ends as well. So that was really the main takeaway for me from this game was the Lions offense has someone outside of Amon-Ra St. Brown that they can go to on late downs and in the red zone. And that was an issue to the offense last year and, earlier in the season, and having Laporta step up and be as good of a tight end as he's been, I think has been really crucial to a lot of their success.
Well, and to your point, the Vikings with Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah as the general manager, they went out and spent, I believe it was something like $7 million APY on Josh Oliver to be that kind of like hand in the grass, down blocking tight end for their run game. Now the run game has kind of been up and down now that they got a real running back in there. It's been better, but Hawkinson was kind of that tight end that's, he's almost always detached from the ball. He's kind of, he's doing a lot of the things that maybe isn't like, he's like the exact opposite tight end that Dan Campbell was when he played in the NFL. And so there was like a mismatch there, but he goes to Minnesota. Minnesota had really struggled to find a number 2 receiver all of last season, 2022. He comes in, effectively plays that role. Now that they got Jordan Addison, you're starting to look at kind of, Ben, what Kwesi has been building. there, where you now have Jefferson, you still got to get him extended. Addison, who looks the real deal as the number 2 guy, especially given, his body type, probably better suited for that. And now you have Hawkinson and Oliver are 2 tight ends that kind of, perfectly fit one another. I sort of think about this team and like whether or not they sign Kirk Cousins and whether or not they win out or whether they make the playoffs or whatever is kind of inconsequential. When I watched the Vikings team on Saturday, I couldn't help but be optimistic about what they're building there and about what their future holds.
Yeah, definitely. I think, the offensive skill position players that they have currently in place heading into next season, I do think obviously there might be, in some ways, question of what they're going to do at running back. But Tyson Chandler, I would say, very much flashed and in finally getting, I would say, a lion's share of the opportunities at the running back position on Saturday. So to me, like, they have built one of the strongest young nucleuses of pass catching options for any quarterback. And I don't want to say they're, an offense that's now agnostic to the quarterback position or maybe isn't influenced by who is actually playing there. But, we saw it with Nick Mullen on, Saturday, 79th percentile EPA per drop back, really good, I would say, and sound against a defense that probably isn't anywhere close to where it was at last year. But to me, like, this is very much a situation where you kind of want to figure out what you have in Jaron Hall for the Minnesota Vikings. He's the one guy that is really probably going to be a constant in that room from, this season to next season, outside of what happens with Kirk Cousins, and really understanding if he can actually be a viable, option to start in this particular offense with this particular set of skill position players is very much what they have to do towards the end of this season. But I'm with you. I think, optimistically, like, they are really setting up to have a lot of guys under contract that are going to be here for quite some time. And if you do, I would say, finally figure out something at the quarterback position where you're not paying a guy, $35 million a year to be a league average quarterback. Like, if you can pay a guy closer to that rookie wage scale at the quarterback position and still be a top 20, top 15 guy, like, they might really have something here in Minnesota and might be able to, I would say, bottom out quicker than what people projected and really be a force in the NFC at large coming up here and, even over the course of next season and the year after.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I watched that game Saturday, Tage, and I'm like, I got a really hot take coming from it, okay? I think even though the Bengals won that game, I come out of that game Saturday more optimistic about the future of the Vikings and the Bengals, and here's why. All the stuff that has been supporting, and I'm a big Joe Burrow guy. When we were all at PFF, like, I wrote Chris Collinsworth's All-Pro team. And he wanted, the only thing he said was, "Hey, Eric, put Burrow first team in 2021." So I did it, and he led the league in passer completion percentage. He led the league in yards per attempt, an incredible feat, a lot of sacks. So it wasn't perfect, of course. I'm somebody who has always thought Burrow was a pretty good player, but then I look at this. I look at what happened on Saturday. I'm thinking to myself, how much of what Joe Burrow is because of things in Cincinnati that aren't necessarily going to be there forever, right? Callahan is the OC, Chase and Higgins for sure probably will not be the 2 receivers on his team all that long. Offensive line, has always kind of been bad, and it's, all this stuff. Like, whereas with Minnesota, it's like, Kirk Cousins has been not a league average quarterback. He's been a top 12, 10, 8 guy. But when you've put in Nick Mullins, it's gone down to, something relatively, it's still okay. It's still efficient. It's still productive. Right. So I'm like, okay, well, if you put a rookie quarterback in the Vikings situation, they're going to be pretty good. If you put rookie players with Joe Burrow, where there were previously veteran good players, it might not be quite as good. Tage, you have the same takeaway from that game.
I'm definitely with you. I've been someone who has been lower on Joe Burrow than consensus. And it's nothing really against him. I think he's a good quarterback. I think just so many of the reasons why people put him high in quarterback rankings, like when they tried to put him in the Mahomes tier, was like because of the stuff that we can't measure, the it factor, the leadership. Like, I just didn't necessarily put a ton of weight in that. But like, when you look at the way that the Bengals have built this team, like, the skill sets of Jamar Chase and T. Higgins match up perfectly for Joe Burrow with the amount of go balls he likes to throw and their ability to bring a lot of those go balls down. So now you're looking at an offseason where T. Higgins is probably going to leave in free agency. Maybe even Tyler Boyd ends up going, you downgrade at tight end. And now you're starting to find someone in Tanner Hudson that can step up, but it's taken them a couple weeks to get going here from that perspective. And, I think the other thing that's been really big for the Bengals as well is when Joe Burrow was playing weeks 1 through 12, and this was partly because of his injury, but also I think partly because of preference, they were in shotgun 85% of the time. And that has gone down to 74% of the time, now that Jake Browning has taken over. And their EPA per rush has gone from 20th in the NFL with Burrow to 8th with Jake Browning. I think that because of Callahan as offense coordinator, Taylor as the play caller and the head coach, they've been able to be a little bit more diverse with the run game. And I think that's definitely benefited them as well on offense.
Yeah, it's so funny. And I get worried about this sometimes because, we've obviously been on the outside for this whole time. And obviously we have friends that work for teams. And so we can ask this question. But from an outsider's perspective, I'm always like, why? Like, there are coaches where you can very clearly see that they schemed up an amazing game plan for this particular quarterback in this particular spot. And the outcomes are like pretty damn good, right? And do these coordinators run out of things to do? Do they get like, I cannot imagine it's laziness, right? That gives rise to a bunch of great game plans with Jake Browning. And then all of a sudden team defenses figure him out. And then these coaches don't have like a left hand to go to when, they take away the right-handed dribble and all this stuff. So it's really interesting to me. And, hopefully Jake Browning can continue this way. Obviously he's not a young guy. He's like kind of 27 or so, was with Minnesota. I know he was motivated, even though that wasn't the regime that let him go. It'll be interesting to see when, just this, what Ben needs, another Viking to lead the nest and to do better somewhere else. But that was just an interesting outcome because I think about this, and obviously there's so many good things that the Bengals have accumulated over the past few years, and we attribute a lot of it to Burrow. And maybe now we're starting to see that it's less about Burrow and more about a lot of stuff that may not be there for all that long any longer, including T. Higgins being kind of the key among them. Let's talk about this game because this was an epic performance here by the Buffalo Bills, but they beat Dallas up pretty badly. Multiple scores here at home in the weather. Dak, frankly looked like he had the sickness that Jalen Hurts has right now going into Monday Night Football. Ben, when you looked at that game, Buffalo closed -2. It was kind of open -1 or so. So there was some money on Buffalo. And from what I was hearing from my communities, it was it was because of sickness and stuff. But it's not just attributed to that. This is a Buffalo team that I think a lot of us going into the year thought was pretty damn good. And now it's different than I think we thought it was going to be. It's less Stephon Diggs and Dalton Kincaid, and it's more James Cook. But this team has really figured out something.
Yeah, definitely. I think to me, full disclosure, I was fully on board with the Cowboys kind of running away with this particular match, but was a spot that I definitely liked from pinnacle betting perspective and all these other things. So to me, it was kind of a shocking outcome to see in a lot of ways the Buffalo Bills, kind of completely flip the script from where they were at kind of like from a successful standpoint. On the offensive side of the football, a lot more of it was James Cook kind of being focal, the focal point of the offense. I think, a lot of people are going to look at the pass rate over expectation, where they've been at in prior seasons and then where they were at, in week 15 in this particular match, but they kind of flipped the script in a lot of ways. And to me, I think the main takeaway for me and the reason why we've kind of started to see this Buffalo Bills figure things out offensively, in a lot of ways has to be the coordinator shift going from Ken Dorsey to Joe Brady. I know it maybe isn't, a focal point of a lot of fans and all these other things, but to me, that was kind of the point at which it seems like they figured things out for Josh Allen. He does seem to be a lot more settled within the pocket. They are still maximizing what they can get with him from his legs, but it isn't a focal point with just Stephon Diggs. And they've gotten a lot of things from, ulterior players, not necessarily, the Dalton Kincaids of the world and those sorts of things, especially on this matchup on Sunday. But I think overall, the direction where they have kind of switched and flipped to is going to be a much more sustainable approach going forward. And I think that the only reason that I can see, outside of Josh Allen maybe just figuring it out mid-season, has to be that switch at the coordinator position to Joe Brady. And I think that's very much kind of how I'm evaluating it, and don't really think I could change or go off that prior unless I do hear some convincing arguments, I would say, elsewhere.
Yeah, one of the things that we want to do for the website next year, as everybody knows, Tage is sort of the creative brain behind the entire thing, is adjust running back efficiency for who the quarterback is in a random way, and adjust passing efficiency for who the coordinator is. By the way, for all those people that don't like Brock Purdy or don't like our graphs attributing EPA to Brock Purdy, even after you strip out Kyle Shanahan, he's still the most efficient quarterback in the NFL. And what I really think is funny here, Tej, is James Cook is second in the NFL in rushing. He leapfrogged Derrick Henry, who somehow managed to have like 20 touches for 12 yards yesterday against Houston, but he's 10th in carries. So we're talking about a guy who's being incredibly efficient. And I got to think that some of that is defenses don't want Josh Allen to keep the ball. And so they're just holding back a little bit here and there, and that's creating creases. And then the other part is that James Cook, I think, actually has some athletic ability that can really take advantage of some of those things. He's been the first Buffalo running back that hasn't been one of these breaking tackle merchants of the Zach Mosses and the Devin Singletaries, who are good in their own right, but different. He's been the one guy who can take those creases that Josh Allen affords them in the running game and actually do something explosive with them.
Mm-hmm. I'm totally with you. I think James Cook is a great player. And yeah, like you mentioned, like someone that gives them an answer in the run game other than Josh Allen, because they were so big on just like spamming the Josh Allen like QB power button when they needed 3 or 4 yards in crucial situations. And like now having James Cook and, someone who ranks 4th in yards per carry in the league among running backs. And, we have the yards created metric on the website as well. He ranks 6th in that, adding 0.56 yards over what an average running back would do in his situation per carry. Like, I just think someone like James Cook that has that ability to get outside and break off explosive runs when needed, and then also be used in the passing game, like we saw so much in the first half against the Chiefs, has been really big for this Bills offense as they find that like second answer besides Stephon Diggs, because like Diggs hasn't had these big blow up games these past couple of weeks, but James Cook has been the main feature of a lot of that. And like Ben mentioned, they're working in Dalton Kincaid, and now that Dawson Knox is back, and even Gabe Davis from time to time, I think you can start to feel better about Buffalo's offense.
Yeah, and as our fantasy teams at Sumer can attest, just Stephon Diggs has not been as productive the last 8 games as he was the first 7 or so. It is interesting as well on defense that they remain injured, but they are getting contributions from guys like Rasul Douglas, who I know, our former employer PFF, with the PFF war, he's been the most valuable corner in the NFL. I don't necessarily think that that's true, but I do think directionally he's been quite good for them and has kind of saved their season on the other side of the ball. That was a really good. CeeDee Lamb was on a offensive player of the year if you take out Tyreek Hill trajectory. And he was pretty much stymied yesterday until the very end. Speaking of stymied, the favorite in the AFC South, now it's only -130 if you look at FanDuel. The Jacksonville Jaguars hosted Baltimore yesterday. Baltimore lost Keaton Mitchell, who with an ACL, who had been really wonderful for them as a running back in concert with Gus Edwards. He goes down. Lamar Jackson, sort of more of the same, where he's not putting up a ton of numbers in the passing game, but he's running the football effectively. He's taking care of the football for the most part. And in this case, it was kind of that meme, Ben, where, like all those players were playing on the ice and they just stood there and all the other players fell down. That's essentially how they played Jacksonville last night. And Jacksonville, sort of played right into their hands. And you have to wonder now, in addition to the concussion, Trevor Lawrence has that knee. How much can you really depend upon Jacksonville here moving forward?
Yeah, definitely. I think, the most surprising thing of all, where the 2023 season has gone has been the fact that like the Indianapolis Colts are going to play meaningful football games to potentially win the AFC South here when it's all said and done after losing, their starting quarterback really early on in the season. So to me, it's been, I would say, a spot where the Jaguars have been very, not necessarily completely underwhelming, but have been really poor in certain stretches of this season, that I think it just speaks to the fact that they are probably not in that same upper echelon type of tier that a lot of these other teams are in the AFC that they're supposed to be able to compete with. And especially kind of coming out of that performance against Kansas City last year in the playoffs, like I think everyone kind of expected the Jaguars to take some sort of step forward. The fact that they did have, very widely the easiest AFC schedule of any like playoff potential team heading into the season. Like, they really haven't lived up to expectations. So I think from my perspective, like, they are a team that I would probably be actively fading come playoff time. They just don't seem like they have figured things out enough. Calvin Ridley, hasn't really been a difference maker in the way in which a lot of people projected. 12 targets yesterday, but only 5 receptions basically for 39 yards. Like, that's a big chunk of target volume, not really being all that efficient, I would say, whatsoever. So I'm with you. I do very much think this was a spot where, the Ravens just kind of outlasted the Jaguars' mistakes. But I also think Baltimore is kind of continuously being a little bit under the radar from like a market consensus type expectation. To me, I thought like the Mark Andrews injury would maybe be a little bit of a bigger fallout from their offense and what they've been able to do through the first half of the season. I think Isaiah Likely has, in a lot of ways, filled that role and filled that gap. Maybe not necessarily better than Mark Andrews, but a way in which Mark Andrews couldn't from more of an explosive play type rate. And I do think that overall it's kind of helped, the rest of the pass catching unit at least somewhat emerge. I know Odell Beckham Jr. had a really quiet game, Zay Flowers as well, but those sorts of offensive outputs are probably going to come when they're actually needed, and just very much weren't needed here on Sunday night. So I'm very bullish on the Ravens, and I do think they could, potentially finally be that AFC representative in the Super Bowl when it's all said and done.
Yeah, let's take a look at our simulation here, because this is like the one division that's actually pretty contested. We have the Jaguars kind of right on market there, 54.8% to make the playoffs. We have Houston with a 17.4%, Indianapolis with a 27.8%. When you look at like the strength of schedules to this point, this is a really tough one, Tage, because when I look at Jacksonville to this point, they've played, if you look among these teams, the Jaguars have played the third hardest schedule, whereas you look at their competition in this division, Houston, Indianapolis are sort of in that fourth and fifth easiest, right? So if you look at that, that's, when they're all at 8-6, they have a sweep over the Colts. They have a 1-1 against Houston. And then you look at the strength of schedule left, Jacksonville's third easiest. Indianapolis and Houston are sort of more in that top 10. When I look at, this one, and Houston and Indianapolis play each other. So in theory, one of those teams has to lose as well, but also one of those teams has to win. Without Lawrence for an extended period of time, it gets dicey. But I do think Jacksonville is still rightly the favorite and favored against the field to be this division's winner. It's just a lot more dicey now, Tage.
Ben kind of mentioned this, and like it's something that you just notice when you're watching the Jaguars, but like the ability to not close out drives has been like really frustrating, I think, to watch. When you look at like their EPA per play before the plus 40, they rank 10th in the league, right in between like the Chiefs and the Ravens. But then once they cross the plus 40 yard line, they get into scoring territory. They rank 28th EPA per play in the league. And you saw it last night with like the fumbles and, some of the miscue at the end of the half where they didn't end up scoring. But, over time, I would expect that to converge a little bit, and they would be able to, have some positive regression in that end. And yeah, if Lawrence stays healthy, and they do close out the season with the Panthers and Titans, so you can feel pretty good about those two games for them. I mean, what really becomes a big game is next week against the Buccaneers, with a not fully healthy Trevor Lawrence. I think that'll be really interesting to watch. And if the Jaguars can win that game, they should wrap up the division. If they lose that game, I think it'll get pretty tight here down the stretch.
Yeah, and I know this wasn't on the sheet, but my God, how well has Baker Mayfield played? I mean, like that, I think Green Bay might be the mark in the NFL, and a lot of us who had some, a lot of people, liked Green Bay over 7.5 wins. That looked like a lock just a couple weeks ago. Now it's really, really dicey. But that defense, man, I've never seen a less sturdy bunch. But good on Canellis and good on Mayfield for sort of taking advantage of that. Chris Godwin basically lined up over the linebackers for the Packers yesterday. They made no adjustments, and Baker Mayfield basically shredded them with what was one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. Now has kind of fallen off a little bit, but that was a really good effort. And I think, that's really going to be the test. The Jaguars defense has been pretty good most of the season. When you look at EPA per play, you look at, basically any metric. They fell off a little bit against Jake Browning, but as we're coming to find out, Jake Browning can actually execute efficient offense. They've been a little bit weaker down the stretch. They were pretty good last night, in my opinion, holding a good offense in Baltimore to what they held them to. But that's a really good matchup. I think if I believe Tampa Bay is about 1.5 to 2.5 point favorites in that game. I support that number. But yeah, to your point, Tage, if Jacksonville if they lose that game, interestingly, for tiebreaker's sake, doesn't matter that much because it's an NFC game. But if it gets down to that, but for the sake of them just kind of getting out ahead and actually, getting a record that's better than Houston and better, than Indianapolis, let's just go through the games here. What it's left. Jaguars go to Tampa, home to Panthers, at Titans. Titans are a frisky team, not to be scoffed at. The Titans, the Texans, I'm sorry, they have the Browns at home, which is a sort of a winnable game, but certainly a defense that will make a backup quarterback, if Keenum has to start again, struggle. Then they have Titans at home, and then they finish with the Colts. The Colts, on the other hand, they go to Atlanta and face the Falcons team that just lost to the Panthers, and then they're home to Raiders and Texans down the stretch. So again, depending upon which team of those you get, it really does matter whether who will come out of there, but it should be pretty fun. Okay, let's finish here with a preview of tonight's game, because we have Philadelphia at Seattle. Seattle 3.5 point home dogs. They're 6-7. They're still in it in the NFC playoff race, right? We look at SumerSports.com /team/league -table. The Seahawks we have the Seahawks with a 32.2% chance to make the playoffs here. They do have a sweep at the hands of the Rams that's not particularly good. That will hurt them a little bit, but if they can win this one at home, with Jalen Hurts kind of dealing with a lot of these bugs, guys, I think that obviously they're going to be in the thick of it. If they lose, they're behind the 8 ball, and really, even though they have their 2 San Francisco and 2 LA Rams teams out of the way, they're going to be in an uphill climb, especially given that it's going to look like Drew Lock tonight against probably Jalen Hurts. Ben, when you're looking at this game at Philadelphia -3.5, like what do you see as far as any discrepancies between your opinion and the market?
Not really. Obviously, there's like a decent amount of home field advantage baked into the Seattle Seahawks price that I think is, obviously reflected in the 3 to 3.5. I think it was 3 yesterday. So in some ways, there is some positive news of Jalen Hurts availability, I think, moving the market even further in the Eagles' direction. And to me, I think it's hard, not to agree with that, to be honest with you. Like Seattle, on the latest reports, I would say haven't necessarily ruled anybody out, but I know their secondary is relatively banged up. Devin Witherspoon is very much questionable. Jamal Adams as well. Like this could be a spot where Jalen Hurts is kind of able to sit back and make some plays with his arm. And I think overall, like that would really be an encouraging long-term thing that a lot of people would buy into if the Eagles going to have a pretty prolific passing attack coming up here tonight. And that's kind of the direction that I'm buying into. I know rain might play a little bit of a role, weather-wise, basically, and being able to move the football. But as long as Jalen Hurts is starting, I do think that the Eagles are going to be able to kind of have a get-right spot against this Seahawks team that's very much kind of banged up, limping into the finish line in a lot of ways, and has probably been, underwhelming overall, throughout the entire 2023 season, because they very much haven't been one of those teams that could really sustainably challenge for an NFC wildcard spot or playoff berth, or even get anywhere close to the 49ers in the NFC West. So I think we kind of see the seams kind of fall apart here on Monday night. And I do think it's very much going to be a little bit of an Eagles showcase game, just based on the injury news and how that could potentially break out coming up here on Monday night.
Yeah, for sure. I think, Tage, I want to ask you a question about kind of league evolution. Devon Witherspoon, which I know as a Lions fan, a little bit of a touchy subject, because Seattle just went and took him when the Lions very much could have just taken him the next pick. So he's played, 12, 13 games or so, 27 pass rush plays, 9 pressures. He's been involved in 3 sacks. Those are numbers from the consumer side of Pro Football Focus, PFF.com. Obviously Jamal Adams is another player for whom the Seahawks want to pass rush, because other than different than Witherspoon, it's because Adams can't cover anybody. But you've seen guys like Harrison Smith change games with pass rushing. You've seen is there is there an extra oomph in terms of pass rushing by defensive backs that I think that we've undervalued coming into this sort of league where, you think about Brian Flores, for example. I know his defense fell apart the other day, but, highest rate in the NFL, one of the highest rates in the NFL in blitzes, one of the highest rates in terms of dropping 8, right? There's kind of no in between. If you're going to be one of those kind of teams, you need defensive backs that can kind of play at the quarterback and play away from the quarterback. That was one of the coolest things I've seen in Seattle so far this year. When you think about league-wide trends, do you think that that's something that's going to continue?
That's a great question. And, to touch on like Witherspoon as like a prospect, like our friend Haley English, who now works for the Lions, like when she was building her defensive back predictive model, like it was really high on Witherspoon across the board. And like, I think that when you see like the physicality from him, that there is like a difference being made from that end. And yeah, I mean, I think as teams have tried their own version of the Vic Fangio type of defense and realizing that it's a little bit harder to run it without Fangio himself, or having some type of Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey type, as I was talking about with Sean Syed today. I think it's going to shift where you're going to have these maybe more Flores type defenses where you're sending different types of pressure, whether it's defensive backs and slot corner blitzes, and you're alternating between running 3 and 6 pass rushers on different plays, because that seems to be what's working in the NFL this year. And we know how those things are usually pretty cyclical. So I could definitely see that happening.
Yeah. And I actually was messaging with Kwesi a couple weeks ago about the Vikings, because I was going through some stuff and I noticed that they give up 70%, or they were giving up 70% completion, but they were one of the top teams in the NFL in terms of pass success rate against. Mm-hmm. So when you think about that, that's, you're making the quarterback get rid of the ball. He can complete those balls, but they're unsuccessful completions, right? And I think that that's when you think about trade-offs that teams have to make when they're building teams. And it's like quarterback too. It's like, if you go ahead and chase that, like, if you're going to go chase a Mahomes, you're going to go chase a Herbert, you're going to go chase a Josh Allen, you're going to end up with a lot of Sam Darnolds and Trey Lances and that kind of thing. And you can withstand that. We've seen the 49ers. They found a quarterback. That's awesome. The Trey Lance thing, we were all in Vegas and everybody's giving them shit for Trey Lance. And in reality, it's like they took a swing of the bat. They missed. They're back on the track. Perfect. I don't know if you can necessarily do that much at corner and safety, and so do you prefer players who are more like sound all around, good tacklers, good blitzers, good in support, but maybe are not, like, you look at all the Vikings DBs, none of them are shutdown corners, Caleb Evans, Mekhi Beck, like none of those guys are actually shutdown guys, but they're all tacklers. They're all guys that can do a ton of things. And I wonder if that's maybe not a more, and Kwesi obviously knowing the math, like if that's not more, a much more resilient way to build a defense. So that was, and How D has a good quote here. Except against the Eagles, they ran all over us, being the Vikings. Yeah, that was alarming. Tage and I were there and watched those run fits in person, and they were certainly something. Before we go, this has been a lot of fun. We have to do this more. I know everybody knows Thomas. He's wonderful. He brings so much insight. He also likes to take vacations during the offseason. So we're going to have plenty of this trio on the podcast in the future. But before we go, we have 3 more weeks left in the season. We have playoffs coming up. I did not prepare any of us for this. Let's go around the circle. Give me your hottest take. What's the hottest prediction that you think is plausible that could happen the rest of the NFL season? I'm going to start with Ben.
I will say that I think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers not only make the playoffs and win the division, but I think they also can make it to at least the divisional round and maybe have an outside shot. I don't know if they're actually going to get past the divisional round, depending on how things stack up. But I think if they play not the 49ers, they could at least give the Cowboys or the Eagles or the Lions a game in the divisional round to the point where things could be a lot more sweaty for either one of those 3 teams. So I'm not going to say they're going to make the conference championship game, but I think they at least have it in the cards to get hot here at the end of the season and ride Baker Mayfield.
All right, Tage.
I like that, Ben. That's a bold prediction. I don't know if mine's going to be as bold here, but for those who don't know, I was I was on Dak 40-1 to win MVP when, like 2 months ago, I think. And, apologize to those who tailed that. I think that died yesterday. But the new one is Josh Allen is usually, around 14-1 to win MVP. I do think he actually ends up winning MVP of the league here at the end of the season. I think that the Bills are going to win out and then maybe even win the AFC East. And if they do that, if they win the AFC East, you're basically betting on that, because I do think that Josh Allen would end up being MVP. He would be, at least second, maybe first in total EPA. And we know that's usually a good predictive metric of that award. So I'm hoping that that could happen there down the stretch.
Yeah, we at Sumer make, and I like that. I've written that in my column, the Friday column, a number of times. But the Bills can remain undervalued longer than that column can remain solvent. So I've sort of stopped. But the Bills, we have a 35.2% chance to win that division. And the path is easy, right? They're 8-6 right now. They're 2 games back. But you look at the Bills' schedule. They go to Los Angeles to play the Chargers. Now, this is a classic one. We've already seen sharps. That thing got after yesterday, went up to 13.5. It's back down to 11.5. We know that NFL teams this time of year at home should just not be installed as that big of underdogs. Even an NFL team that got beat by like 70 points to the Vegas Raiders. So, that's not a gimme, but it's close, right? And then they host the Patriots, which that team plays hard, but they're drawing dead. Who knows if Bill Belichick, what his situation will be by then. And then, of course, they go to Miami to try to win against the Dolphins team that they beat handily early in the season. The Dolphins, on the other hand, they have Dallas at home this week. They go to Baltimore on New Year's Eve. And then, of course, they face the Bills at home. So, there is a really good chance. I mean, the Bills don't even, the funny thing is there are different paths. I got to go through the tiebreaker things, but if the Dolphins lose, Dolphins still have to lose out, I believe, for this thing to be a thing, I want to say. But Buffalo, I believe there's a couple different paths where Buffalo can win the division that does not involve them winning out. So there is some path there. I have to go through the tiebreakers, but that's a very good one. I like that one a lot. All right, here's mine. I asked this question at the beginning of the podcast. It was very pointed. I do believe in teams. I believe that in football, because of the way schemes and everything go, I do think you can peak at the wrong time. Mm-hmm. I also think that you can bottom out at the right time. And I believe that the Eagles, the Bills, the Chiefs, and the Lions have all bottomed out at the right time. I think getting Chauncey Gardner-Johnson back, possibly getting some other, like Aleem McNeil could possibly come back. I don't actually know if that's true. I think Detroit has a real chance to win the NFC still. I think that, they possibly get the 2 seed. Like, let's say, like Philly's only a 3.5 point favorite tonight. Right. They possibly get the 2 seed. They could get the 3 seed. In either event, they're not facing the 0-2 Bucks or the 85 Bears in the first round of the playoffs. They get that game at home. I think we'll all be there. It'll be a lot of fun. Then, there could be an upset in the first round, et cetera. The coolest thing about the NFL now is if you're the 3 seed, you can still play a home game in round 2 because the 2 seed can get upset. And I do think that the teams like Dallas, teams like Philly could get upset in the first round. I think the Niners are somewhat Teflon, but we've already seen it with San Francisco the last couple games. Brock Purdy gets hit, and Brock Purdy, there's injury risk with that Niners team where I think they're the best team in the NFL when healthy, and I don't think it's close. I think they're a field goal better than any team in the NFL when healthy. But no one is more susceptible. No one has a drop off that's larger with respect to injuries than the 49ers do. And so I do think that there's a path for your Detroit Lions to win the NFC. And this is not something I believed going into the year, but I do believe it now. The AFC has some good teams, but there's not this, any AFC team would be favored by a touchdown over any NFC team. I think that the AFC teams are better than the NFC teams, but I don't think it's by that much. And so if Detroit makes the Super Bowl, I think they got a puncher's chance to win it. So that's my hot take.
That's been your hot take since day one. I would also ask the question, have the 49ers bottomed out or not is the other question.
Well, they did. Right? So they bottomed out when they lost the 3 in a row, and then they got healthy. But again, I think the 3-game losing streak is illustrative of two facts. A, that their great players are truly great, right? When they're out, they're nowhere close. They can lose to the Vikings, they can lose to the Browns, etc. They can lose to Cincinnati. They got killed by Cincinnati. But that their great players are great. However, when they're out, and we've seen Debo, Trent Williams, Purdy's missed time, not a ton, but he's missed some time. He's been hurt a little bit. I do think it gets hard for them. And so they're a tough matchup in the playoffs. That's why they're always in the NFC Championship game. They're just so much different than everybody else. It's so hard to prepare for them. But I do not think that they are this like unbeatable force that they currently are, which I will say they are right now, but I don't know if predictively they will be. So what do you think, Tage? Do you think you got a shot, or am I just blowing smoke?
I mean, I got chills listening to that, honestly, just thinking about the Lions in the Super Bowl. But I do think you bring up good points where it's like there are two paths for the Lions to make the NFC Championship. The main one is the easy to see. The Eagles end up losing tonight to the Seahawks, and Lions are able to beat the Cowboys and Vikings here in these next 2 weeks to end up securing the 2 seed. And then they're able to play, whether it's the Rams or the Packers at home in their first playoff game, Eagles in their second playoff game. And we know the Eagles defense is susceptible and now have the defensive coordinator change. And then they have the game against San Francisco. But the other path I think that's interesting is it kind of goes the other way, where it's Lions lose to Dallas, Eagles win tonight, and the Lions basically lock up the 3 seed going into week 18, and they're able to take that week off to rest their starters. Right. And then you're able to have a week of prep extra for that Eagles game, assuming you win your wild card round, and you can feel good about getting that while maybe the Eagles are still, playing for something in that week or something like that. So I think those are the paths for the Lions. That's what I spend a lot of my free time thinking about is those different ways to get to the NFC Championship game.
Yeah, it would be so much fun. 1991 was the last and only time the Detroit Lions played in the NFC Championship game. They went to Washington and lost to the football team. But they did kill Dallas in the divisional round at home after they had to bye there. So that was a good time. I'm excited. I think that this season has been at times really weird with officiating and injuries and everything, but we're lining up for some really compelling football. No one I think is going to run away with the Super Bowl. And frankly, the team that's favored going into January is almost never the team that actually wins it. So, and that's just probability. So this has been a great show. We'll probably have another one Wednesday. We might even have the same cast Wednesday. It depends on what Thomas's schedule is. But yeah, we're truly busy right now. We want to thank you all for joining. If you liked what you listened to, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Once this show hits it big, you can tell all your friends that you were there first. Just like Taylor Swift, you could say, "Hey, I was one of the first Swifties in the world." Now all you guys are watching her on football games. You could say, "I was the first person that liked the SumerSports show." We'll come up with a name for you guys a little bit later. So for Ben Brown, for Tage Seth, this has been the SumerSports Show.